Have you ever wondered what it takes to achieve greatness? To shape history in a way so profound that your name echoes for centuries? That's exactly what Alexander the Great did, and Plutarch's The Life of Alexander the Great captures not just the events of his life, but the very essence of his character. This isn't just a story about battles and empires, it's about ambition, leadership, vision, and the flaws that come with reaching for something bigger than yourself. Alexander was a man of incredible brilliance, but he was also deeply human, with all the complexities that entails. So why should you listen to this? Because Alexander's story holds timeless lessons for all of us. Whether you're chasing your own ambitious goals, navigating leadership challenges, or simply curious about one of the most extraordinary figures in history, this book has something for you. Let's dive in and uncover the lessons, the cautionary tales, and the legacy of one of history's greatest icons. Plutarch's The Life of Alexander the Great is more than just a biography, it's an exploration of one of history's most fascinating figures through the lens of morality and character. Plutarch isn't just telling us what happened, he's showing us who Alexander was, and why he became such a legendary figure. Picture Alexander as a flame, both illuminating and destructive, burning bright with ambition but sometimes consuming everything in his path. From his youth to his untimely death, Plutarch paints a vivid portrait of a man whose dreams and flaws were equally monumental. The story begins with Alexander's divine origins. His mother, Olympias, surrounded herself with mystical rituals, and his father, King Philip II of Macedon, believed his son was destined for greatness, a belief strengthened by omens and prophecies. Alexander was tutored by none other than Aristotle, who instilled in him a love for philosophy and literature. Alexander carried a copy of Homer's Iliad with him, seeing himself as a modern Achilles, destined to achieve immortal glory. Even as a child, Alexander showed hints of his extraordinary future. The famous story of him taming the wild horse Bucephalus highlights his determination and insight. By his teenage years, he was already taking on leadership roles, governing Macedonia in his father's absence and even founding his own city. His early military successes, like his role in the Battle of Chaeronea, set the stage for the empire building that would define his life. Plutarch takes us through Alexander's dazzling campaigns, starting with his invasion of the Persian Empire. Against overwhelming odds, Alexander defeated Darius III in key battles like Granicus and Gaugamela. His personal courage was legendary, he often fought at the front lines, inspiring his troops with his bravery. But his victories were not just military, they were cultural. Alexander sought to blend Greek and Persian customs, marrying a Persian princess and encouraging his officers to do the same. He envisioned a world united under his rule, one that transcended national and cultural boundaries. But for all his greatness, Alexander's flaws are just as memorable. His ambition turned into arrogance, and his temper led to tragic decisions, including the execution of loyal friends like Clitus. Plutarch doesn't shy away from these darker moments, showing how Alexander's quest for glory sometimes came at a terrible cost. Cities were razed, thousands were killed, and his own troops began to question his judgment. Yet, even in his failures, Alexander's sheer energy and vision are awe-inspiring. Plutarch ultimately leaves us with a complicated legacy. Alexander was a unifier and a destroyer, a philosopher-king and a ruthless conqueror. His empire didn't last, fragmenting soon after his death at the age of 33. But his influence endured, shaping the course of history and spreading Greek culture across the known world. Reading Plutarch's account, it's impossible not to be captivated by Alexander's story. He was a man of immense contradictions, noble yet flawed, brilliant yet reckless. And through Plutarch's eyes, we're reminded that greatness often comes at a cost, both for the one who seeks it and for the world they leave behind. Plutarch's The Life of Alexander the Great feels more like an epic tale than a traditional biography. It's the story of a young man who believed he was destined for greatness and acted with the unshakable conviction that he could bend the world to his will. Imagine a teenager, tutored by Aristotle, carrying the weight of prophecies and omens about his birth, setting out not just to conquer lands but to reshape history. Plutarch isn't just interested in the battles or political strategies, he wants to understand Alexander as a person. What made him so brilliant, so daring, but also so flawed? Let's unpack the core of Alexander's life and see how his ambition, brilliance, and humanity come together in a story that's both inspiring and cautionary. It all begins with the idea that Alexander was no ordinary man. Plutarch shares how Alexander's mother, Olympias, surrounded herself with mysticism, and how omens foretold his greatness. There's a story about a thunderbolt striking Olympias in a dream, symbolizing that she would give birth to a powerful son. Alexander himself believed he was descended from Achilles on one side and Hercules on the other. Can you imagine growing up with that sense of destiny? Add to that the influence of Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers in history. Aristotle didn't just teach Alexander about science and literature, he gave him a framework for understanding the world and a hunger for greatness. Alexander carried a copy of Homer's Iliad with him everywhere, seeing himself as the new Achilles, destined to achieve immortal glory. His ambition was colossal because he truly believed he was chosen by the gods. Even as a child, Alexander stood out. The famous story of him taming Bucephalus, the wild horse no one else could control, is more than just a charming tale. It shows his ability to see what others couldn't. While everyone else saw a dangerous animal, Alexander noticed the horse was afraid of its own shadow. By turning Bucephalus toward the sun, Alexander calmed him and earned a lifelong companion. That's Alexander in a nutshell, seeing possibilities where others saw obstacles. When he was only 16, he was left in charge of Macedonia while his father, King Philip II, was away. Alexander didn't just govern, he quelled a rebellion and founded a city, Alexandropolis. At 18, he led the cavalry at the Battle of Kyrenia, crushing the famed sacred band of Thebes. What were you doing at 18? Alexander was already shaping history. But Alexander wasn't content to inherit a stable kingdom. Plutarch paints him as someone who thrived on challenge and risk. When he heard of his father's victories, Alexander wasn't just proud, he was frustrated. He worried Philip would leave him no great conquests to achieve. He once remarked, "My father will leave me nothing to do." That restless ambition drove everything Alexander did. He wanted a life of action, glory, and achievement, not wealth or comfort. And once he became king at 20, following his father's assassination, he wasted no time in setting out to conquer the Persian Empire. Think about that for a moment. At 20 years old, he wasn't just leading a kingdom, he was launching one of the most ambitious military campaigns in history. Plutarch's account of Alexander's conquests is nothing short of dazzling. With an army vastly outnumbered by the Persians, Alexander won stunning victories at battles like Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela. He wasn't just a brilliant strategist, he was a charismatic leader who inspired unshakable loyalty in his troops. He led from the front, charging into battle alongside his men, often putting himself in grave danger. Plutarch tells us how Alexander was easily recognized on the battlefield by the white plumes on his helmet. In one battle, his helmet was struck by a Persian commander's axe, narrowly missing his skull. Yet, he fought on. Can you imagine the kind of courage or perhaps recklessness it takes to be that kind of leader? But Alexander wasn't just about military victories. He had a vision that went beyond conquest. He wanted to create a unified world, blending Greek and Persian cultures. He married a Persian princess, Roxana, and encouraged his officers to marry Persian women. He recruited Persian soldiers into his army and adopted some Persian customs, even wearing their royal robes. To Alexander, these gestures symbolized unity. But to his Macedonian soldiers, they felt like betrayal. They began to question whether Alexander was still one of them or if he had become something else entirely. This tension between his vision and his people's loyalty is one of the most fascinating parts of his story. Was Alexander ahead of his time, or was he simply too ambitious for his own good? Plutarch doesn't shy away from Alexander's flaws. For all his greatness, Alexander could be impulsive, arrogant, and cruel. His temper was legendary and sometimes catastrophic. One of the most shocking moments in his life was when he killed Clitus, a close friend and trusted general, in a drunken rage. Clitus had saved Alexander's life in battle, but during a heated argument, Alexander lost control and stabbed him. Plutarch describes Alexander's immediate regret, locking himself in his quarters and refusing to see anyone for days. It's a stark reminder of how even the greatest figures can be brought low by their own flaws. Alexander's growing demand for divine honors also alienated many of his men. He began to see himself as a god, which led to paranoia and a sense of isolation. How do you follow a leader who believes he's more than human? As Alexander pushed further east, his conquests became more grueling. The campaign in India was marked by brutal battles, including a clash with war elephants at the Battle of Hydaspes. Though victorious, Alexander's army was exhausted. They had been marching and fighting for years, thousands of miles from home. When Alexander proposed crossing the Ganges River to continue his conquests, his men refused. This was the moment when even Alexander's boundless ambition met its limit. Reluctantly, he turned back, but his return journey was disastrous. The march through the Gedrosian desert cost countless lives and left his army shattered. Plutarch gives us a sense of how Alexander's relentless drive had begun to destroy the very people who had made his conquests possible. And then, at just 33 years old, Alexander died in Babylon. The cause remains a mystery: fever, poison, or exhaustion from years of campaigning. Plutarch doesn't dwell on the details of his death but focuses on the tragedy of unfulfilled potential. What might Alexander have achieved if he had lived longer? He left behind an empire that quickly fractured, but his cultural legacy endured. The spread of Greek ideas, art, and philosophy across Asia. The Hellenistic age was a direct result of his conquests. Reading Plutarch's account, it's hard not to be captivated by Alexander. He was a man of contradictions, a unifier and a destroyer, a philosopher-king and a ruthless conqueror. His life was both a triumph and a cautionary tale. Plutarch leaves us with questions that linger. Was Alexander's greatness worth the cost? Did his ambition elevate him, or did it ultimately destroy him? And perhaps the biggest question of all, what drives someone to try and reshape the world in their image, and what price are they willing to pay? Alexander's story is one of brilliance and tragedy, a reminder that even the most extraordinary lives are still, in the end, human. Now that we've walked through the incredible story of Alexander the Great, what can we actually take away from his life? Plutarch didn't write his lives just to entertain, he wanted us to reflect, to learn, and to grow. Alexander's story is packed with lessons, some inspiring, some cautionary. So, how do we take his extraordinary, larger-than-life journey and translate it into something practical for our own lives? Let's dig into it. First, let's talk about ambition. Alexander didn't just dream small. He wasn't content to be king of Macedonia or to enjoy the wealth and comfort of his position. No, he wanted to conquer the world, to leave a legacy that would echo through the ages. Now, of course, not everyone needs to aim for global domination, but there's something powerful about aiming high, isn't there? What's your version of conquering the Persian Empire? Maybe it's launching a business, mastering a skill, or making a difference in your community. The key lesson here is not to settle. Don't let the fear of failure hold you back. If Alexander could stare down armies 10 times the size of his own, surely you can take a chance on your goals. But here's the actionable takeaway: ambition without a plan is just a dream. Alexander meticulously prepared before every campaign. He knew his strengths, studied his enemies, and always had a strategy. So, ask yourself, what's your game plan? How are you preparing to tackle your Persian Empire? Next, we have Alexander's ability to inspire others. Imagine being one of his soldiers, marching across deserts and fighting in battles far from home, yet still believing in him. That kind of loyalty isn't earned by luck. Alexander led from the front. He didn't just give orders, he showed up in the thick of the fight. His actions spoke louder than words. So, what about you? If you're in a leadership role, whether at work, in your family, or among friends, how are you showing up for the people who rely on you? Are you setting the example, or are you expecting others to do what you won't? People follow leaders they trust, and trust is built through action. Here's something practical you can do. Think about one way you can lead from the front this week. Maybe it's taking on a tough task at work or stepping up in a group project. Whatever it is, make sure your actions match your expectations. Another important takeaway from Alexander's life is cultural understanding. Alexander wasn't just a conqueror, he was a unifier. He didn't view the people he defeated as enemies to be destroyed, he saw them as part of his vision for a greater world. That's why he encouraged marriages between Greeks and Persians and adopted elements of Persian culture. Now, he didn't always get it right, and Plutarch shows us the tension this caused with his own people. But the principle is still relevant. How often do we dismiss or ignore perspectives that are different from our own? Whether it's cultural, political, or even just personal differences, there's value in finding common ground. So, here's something you can try. The next time you're in a conversation with someone who sees the world differently, ask yourself, what can I learn from them? Maybe it's as simple as trying a new cuisine, reading a book from another culture, or learning a few phrases in a new language. These small steps can open the door to bigger connections. Finally, let's talk about hubris, because if there's one thing that brought Alexander down, it was his inability to recognize his limits. As he pushed further east, his ambition turned into recklessness. He began to alienate the people closest to him, demanding divine honors and ignoring the voices of reason around him. How often do we fall into the same trap? Maybe it's not on the same scale, but think about it. When was the last time you dismissed feedback because you thought you knew better? Or pushed yourself too hard, thinking you were invincible? Alexander's story is a stark reminder of what happens when pride takes over. The actionable takeaway here is simple but powerful: stay grounded. Surround yourself with people who challenge you, not just those who agree with you. And when you get feedback, especially the tough kind, pause and really think about it. Sometimes the hardest thing to hear is exactly what you need to grow. So, where does that leave us? Alexander's life is a whirlwind of triumphs and mistakes, and Plutarch captures it all so vividly. But the real value in his story isn't just in the history, it's in the lessons. Aim high, but plan for success. Lead by example and earn the loyalty of those around you. Embrace different perspectives to build bridges, not walls. And most importantly, don't let pride be your downfall. If Alexander's life teaches us anything, it's that greatness comes with challenges, and how we navigate those challenges defines who we are. What's your next step? What piece of Alexander's story will you take with you? Because, in the end, the question isn't whether you can conquer the world, it's whether you're ready to conquer your own. Alexander the Great's story, as told by Plutarch, is nothing short of extraordinary. But like any larger-than-life tale, it has its blind spots, areas where the glitter of his achievements overshadows the darker truths lurking beneath. Let's pull back the curtain a bit and take a closer look at what Plutarch might have missed or chosen to gloss over. After all, even the brightest stars cast shadows. What are we not seeing when we marvel at Alexander's greatness? And how might that shape our understanding of his legacy? One major blind spot is the cost of Alexander's ambition. Plutarch's admiration for Alexander is obvious, and it's hard not to be swept up in the drama of his victories and vision. But what about the lives that were destroyed along the way? Alexander's conquests weren't just a series of brilliant battles, they were also catastrophes for countless cities and people. Take Thebes, for instance. When the city rebelled, Alexander didn't just defeat it, he obliterated it. Thousands were killed, tens of thousands were sold into slavery, and a cultural hub of Greece was reduced to ruins. Plutarch mentions these events, but he often frames them as necessary or even justifiable acts of war. Yet, it's worth asking, could Alexander have achieved his goals without leaving such destruction in his wake? Was there another way, or was his path to greatness paved with unavoidable suffering? Then there's the question of the empire he left behind. Plutarch focuses on Alexander's vision of unity, his blending of Greek and Persian cultures, and his grand idea of a connected world. But here's the thing, that vision didn't last. After Alexander's death, his empire quickly fractured, torn apart by his generals, who fought over its remains like scavengers. Plutarch doesn't spend much time on this fallout, perhaps because it undermines the idea of Alexander as a world builder. But it raises an important point: was Alexander's empire built to endure, or was it simply too much, too fast? He brought Greek culture to Asia, yes, but did he leave the kind of structures needed to sustain his achievements? What good is a legacy if it collapses the moment you're gone? Another blind spot is Alexander's treatment of those closest to him. Plutarch paints a vivid picture of Alexander's charisma and his ability to inspire loyalty. But let's not forget the darker moments when Alexander betrayed that loyalty. The killing of Clitus is the most famous example, a drunken act of rage that cost Alexander one of his most loyal companions. And then there's Parmenio, the trusted general who was executed on suspicion of treason, even though the evidence was shaky at best. Plutarch acknowledges these events but often frames them as isolated incidents or products of Alexander's overwhelming stress. But how often do we excuse someone's actions just because they're brilliant or successful? Could it be that Alexander's darker impulses were just as much a part of him as his virtues? Lastly, there's the question of what Alexander really accomplished. Plutarch sees him as a civilizing force, spreading Greek culture and ideas across the known world. And to some extent, that's true. The Hellenistic age was born from Alexander's conquests. But let's not ignore the fact that this cultural exchange was often forced. Greek temples, theaters, and cities sprang up across Asia, but they were built on the foundations of destruction. Did Alexander truly create something new, or did he impose his culture on those he conquered? And was his version of unity really unity at all, or just the dominance of one culture over many? When we step back and look at Alexander's life with a critical eye, it's clear that his story isn't just one of greatness, it's also one of contradictions. He was a visionary, but his vision came at a cost. He was a leader, but he could also be ruthless. He dreamed of unity, but his actions often sowed division. Plutarch gives us a glimpse of these complexities, but his admiration for Alexander sometimes blinds him to the full picture. And maybe that's the real lesson here: no matter how dazzling someone's achievements might be, it's worth asking what was lost along the way. Alexander's story is a reminder that even the greatest lives have their shadows. So, as we marvel at his brilliance, let's not forget to look at the cost of the light. If Alexander's story leaves you hungry for more, there are several works that can deepen your understanding of him and the world he shaped. For a military perspective, Arrian's The Campaigns of Alexander offers a detailed account of his conquests, often referred to as one of the most reliable ancient sources. If you're curious about what inspired Alexander's heroic ideals, Homer's Iliad provides a glimpse into the epic tales that shaped his view of glory and leadership. For a broader historical context, Victor Davis Hanson's The Western Way of War explores the military traditions that influenced Alexander and the Greeks. And if fiction is more your style, Mary Renault's The Persian Boy offers a vivid, emotional retelling of Alexander's later years through the eyes of one of his companions. These works complement Plutarch's account, giving you new angles to consider: his strategies, his inspirations, and even the personal side of his journey. Interested in diving deeper into any of these perspectives? Let me know which path you'd like to explore. Alexander's story, as told by Plutarch, reminds us that greatness is never simple. It's a mix of ambition, brilliance, and vision, but also flaws, failures, and sacrifices. Alexander conquered the known world, but not without a cost. He unified cultures, inspired loyalty, and achieved the unimaginable, yet his hubris and relentless drive left shadows on his legacy. What does this mean for us today? It's a call to aim high, to lead with courage, and to learn from both triumphs and mistakes. Plutarch shows us that greatness isn't about being perfect, it's about embracing the journey, no matter how messy it gets. If Alexander's story resonated with you, let's keep the conversation going. Like, comment below with your thoughts, or subscribe to join us as we explore more timeless stories and their lessons. What part of Alexander's journey inspired you the most or maybe made you pause and reflect? Let's hear it.